fictional friends, and welcome to another episode of Fully Booked. I'm Megan.
And I'm Shireen.
And we're still in the middle of Alternate History Month on the podcast and on the website at fullybooked.ca.
Don't forget the website.
Don't forget the website. And sign up for the newsletter. And I'm going to keep plugging it, even if it bothers people.
It's a pretty good newsletter.
Honestly, you know what? Genuinely,
yeah.
It's a good newsletter. My fiance is working very fucking hard on it. So please.
He actually is.
Yeah.
He was working hard at it on a Saturday night. So you know what? Fullybooked.ca/newsletter. Please feel free to go sign up for it. It just gives you once a week just a little bit of information. It's nice because it's a roundup of some of the new stuff that we've put out on the site. So that way, if anything strikes your fancy, you can go look at it right away without having to search for something. Totes.
Yeah. Okay, so still back in the alternate history universe of things. Now we're getting into, that's what we talked about My Lady Jane already, and we're getting into some of the American history and that conspiracy theory aspect of American history that is so prevalent.
They do love a conspiracy
they love
theory.
a conspiracy. They love a conspiracy. So today we're going to talk about the 2016 adaptation of 11/22/63, written by Stephen King, which was published in 2011 originally. We've been talking about Stephen King a lot lately.
Yes, we have.
Yeah, we have. Well, Salem's Lot came out last month and stuff, so yeah.
Well, spooky month, you gotta do a Stephen King, right?
Kind of feels like you have no choice.
Well, there's so much of it.
There's so much to do. Yeah. So, for anyone who's not familiar for any particular reason, 11/22/63 is, like I said, obviously I know a lot of people know Stephen King is a straight horror author, but he's actually written quite a bit of other stuff as well outside of that realm. He's done fantasy stuff, a little bit of science fiction, some time travel stuff, a lot of kind of a mix of different things. And 11/22/63 is one of those different ones that gets into that science fiction time travel kind of sphere of things as opposed to horror. Is there a mystery and a thriller aspect to it? 100%. But it's not straight horror at all.
Yeah. No, not at all.
Not at all.
Not even a little bit.
No, that's it. So, so for anybody who's not aware, the title of the novel is based on the date of November 22nd, of 1963, which was the day that in Dealey Plaza in Dallas, Texas, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. He was the 35th president of the United States, and he was doing a tour there. At the time, he was in a Cadillac, basically, a large car in Dealey Plaza, which is a large historic district of Dallas, which still exists to this day. Obviously, he was in the car with his wife Jacqueline Kennedy, as well as Texas Governor John Connally and Connally's wife Nellie Connally as well. And he was fatally shot by a man named Lee Harvey Oswald, who was hiding with a rifle up in the large, I think it was a book depository, a very large building in that square, essentially.
It's widely regarded that this was a very big turning point in American history.
Massively. And so it stands to reason that there would be multiple stories written about this, including Stephen King deciding to write the idea of perhaps being an alternate history of some kind existing. Yeah, or what if we were able to stop that from happening, which is really the question that's posited in this. So
there's also a lot of theories that Lee Harvey Oswald was not the killer.
Or that there were multiple shooters is a big one. That's a really, really big one.
That it was the Secret Service that did it.
That the Secret Service, that the Secret Service did it. There is a prevalent theory about some person they call the Badge Man, who was essentially standing on a grassy knoll. Yes, that's it. Yeah. Exactly. Actually, that's literally what it was. Yeah. Outside as well, who allegedly some people claimed later to have seen where it had a badge and had a gun pointed and stuff, but that's it. There's so much about it that we don't know, basically. So, as they were driving through the square, that's it. Kennedy was shot in the head. Governor Connally was also shot, but he recovered in hospital later. I don't think it was overly serious. They took Lee Harvey Oswald was a former Marine, hence the sharpshooting. Sharpshooter. Oh my god! The Boston sharpshooter. He always says it in this show, and every time I'm like, oh, it's stuck in my head now. The Massachusetts of it in this, and also because Kennedy, of course, was from Massachusetts as well. Yeah. I'm so sorry, anybody listening to Massachusetts. It's like, shut the fuck
That
up,
is a terrible accent.
Garbage. Anyway, okay. So yes, he was shot. Connolly was also, I believe, shot, or the bullet ricocheted or something. I don't know what exactly happened.
I think
Kennedy
it might.
Because it essentially hit the crown of his head at the back there. So
I think it got the other dude.
It might have done. Yeah, that's it. He was rushed to the hospital, and unfortunately, he was pronounced dead less than a half hour after the shooting, because it was essentially fatal, obviously. Yeah. And I believe, 2 hours later, Lyndon B. Johnson, who was the VP at the time, was sworn in on Air Force One because they needed to get somebody else in immediately. Afterwards, after the assassination took place, Lee Harvey Oswald returns to his home to get another gun. He shoots and kills a Dallas policeman named J.D. Tippett just shortly after that. And then this basically indicates that about 70 minutes after Kennedy and Connolly were shot, Oswald is apprehended by Dallas police and charged with the murders. 2 days later, on November 24th of 1963, live TV cameras and news outlets were covering Oswald being moved through the basement of the Dallas police headquarters. He was fatally shot and killed by a nightclub owner named Jack Ruby. He was also taken to the same hospital that Kennedy had been at and was pronounced dead. While he was there, Ruby was originally convicted of Oswald's murder, and then the decision was overturned throughout an appeal. However, while waiting on a new trial in 1967, Jack Ruby died of cancer, a pulmonary embolism.
So weird. You can see why there would be so many conspiracy theories that come out of this. Just based on what you just said.
Yep.
Why would he go assassinate the president, grab another gun, go back out again and kill a random police officer?
Well, that's it, yeah. And also... you have to keep in mind as well, this was the early 1960s. The Cold War was still something that was happening. There was a lot of chatter to do with potential KGB involvement or Soviet involvement in some way.
Vietnam happening, or was that over or not started yet?
It wasn't started yet.
That's right. That was Johnson who started that one, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Communism, that's prevalent in this show.
Yes, exactly. Communism, that's because the Cold War, post-World War II era that we're in right now, when this is happening, was something that was very prevalent. And so there was a lot of thought that Oswald could have been possibly some sort of sleeper KGB agent of some kind and had been radicalized.
But again, then why is there a nightclub owner assassinating this guy? And, why was he acquitted? What is going on?
Agreed.
You know,
so essentially, and that's it. If you think about this too, in the same 10-year span, or I should say even in less than that, because this was in 1963, throughout the rest of the 1960s, what would follow would be in 1965, Malcolm X would be assassinated.
Right.
In 1968, Robert Kennedy, JFK's brother, would be assassinated, as well as Martin Luther King Jr. So this kicked off 4 massive assassinations in political history in the United States throughout the course of the 1960s.
These were massively influential people.
Yes.
They, again, every time one of them died, it changed the course of history.
100%.
And it's just it's a little shocking because it's JFK was assassinated, and then his brother was assassinated. And all the ideologies and the things that they stood for were essentially extinct in the moment that they were assassinated, right?
And blowing out a candle.
Oh yeah. And I think that this is why there's been, and not to go off on a tangent here about politics,
but it's good.
I think this is why there's so much discussion around Trump, for example, right now, and there's been, I'm using air quotes here, 2 attempts to assassinate him.
Yes.
And it would just be it could go one of 2 ways. Would his ideologies be extinct, or would he then be portrayed as a martyr?
Yeah.
And it's very, very delicate.
It's so delicate.
Because Martin Luther King Jr., for example, JFK, I don't know if we see them as martyrs, but they represented something that people then really started to believe in some ways.
Yeah.
But the power behind it, the political power behind it, was extinct, and it was moved on to something else completely.
To something completely different. And and this is something, so that's it. So the premise of both the novel and the miniseries that came out in 2016 is that a young teacher. High school English teacher named Jake Epping.
Played by James Franco.
Which we're not going to talk about outside of that. I don't want to.
I know. It's too bad because he was so cute.
You can't watch anything anymore at this point.
I know.
It's incredible.
I know.
So Jake Epping is he's just gotten divorced recently from his wife. He lives in Lisbon, Maine, which is a real place. It's not a dairy thing. It's a real one.
Pennywise doesn't jump out.
No, but in the novel, there are connections to it.
Oh, really?
Yes, there's an interwoven bit of a story. So overarching premise, because if we got into the whole thing, it's an 8-episode miniseries. I would highly recommend watching it. It's incredibly well done.
Really good.
Really, legitimately, it's very good. Now that I rewatched most of it before we did the episode, and I'm actually tempted to pick up the book.
Oh yeah, because I was at home.
I've never picked it up.
This big.
Oh, it's huge.
It's massive.
I think it took Stephen King a while to do all the research and come up with all the premise of this as well. Yeah. So essentially that's it. He's a little down in the dumps. He's just gotten divorced recently, and he's gone to this small diner in town for years, and he's friends with a man named Al Templeton who owns the diner. Who he accidentally, one day, when coming back into the diner, Al stumbles out seemingly very ill when he saw him legitimately 2 minutes prior go into the back, and he seemed totally fine and is incredibly confused by this. And Al decides to show and admit to Jake that there is a portal through his diner that takes you back to 1960.
That's right. It's 1960 because he doesn't go back to the exact day.
October 21st of 1960 is the actual day that you always go back to.
Right. You always go back to that.
You always go back to the day, and no matter how long you stay in the 1960s,
it's no time at all.
It's 2 minutes every time you come back through into 2016. In this case, it's 2011 in the book, but you know what I mean. And in the book as well, it's actually 1958 that you go back to. It's even further back. Yeah, it's like a whole thing. Anyway, in the show, that's it. You come back, and it's been 2 minutes. No matter how long you've been there, it could be years, and you come back to the same time. It's crazy. So, it's really seeing is believing. So he essentially shoves Jake through the portal. He's like, okay, yeah, no, go take a look. Go see. You should go and take a look at this.
Isn't there like a whole thing where what did you say his name was? Jake? Yeah. He's always saying how good the food is in the diner. And it's because he's going back and he's getting food from the 60s that don't have any pesticides. It's also
because he says how good the burgers are and also how cheap the prices are. Because the burger's like $2 or something. Yeah. And even in 2016, that would be unheard of. It would be at least $10, if not more, right? So he's always commenting on it, and Al reveals to him that in the times that he's been going back, he goes to this butcher, and so he gets it for he gets it for no money, and also that's why he keeps his prices so low. And Jake has a whole freak out where he's like, I've been eating burgers from 1960. What the fuck?
Yeah, it's so good.
It's really funny. And it's unclear as to whether or not this has just happened because of the portal and the time travel. However, Al, unfortunately, has developed cancer. He's become very sick, and he says he had, before his last trip there, where he stayed for like almost 2 years, he had gone for a checkup and he was totally fine. But then when he comes back through, he has cancer and it's quite severe and he's dying, essentially. And so what he reveals to Jake is that after he discovered that this portal existed, he decided that he was going to I guess, look at things from a historical perspective, and decided, if I could do something to help change the course of history, what would I do? And his answer to that was, I would try to prevent the Kennedy assassination. Because after, again, as I've just mentioned, after Kennedy's assassination comes the assassination of all of these other very powerful political figures who were at the forefront of very powerful political movements and cultural movements that were taking place in the 1960s at a time when segregation was still quite prevalent, and when there were many race wars happening and many issues within the community in America and in the political landscape as a whole. And so all of those assassinations occurred. Vietnam happens.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that's it. The, Korean War, I think it already happened at that point. But anyway.
Yeah, that was earlier than that.
I think it might have been, that's it. But like Vietnam takes place, which is also something that massively changes the course of U.S. political history as well.
And like McCarthyism and all that
Exactly,
fun stuff,
all of that stuff that followed suit as well. And so his thought was like, basically Al's thinking is if we can go back and stop this thing from happening, perhaps it could prevent so many other negative things like this from coming to pass, basically. And at first, Jake is very resistant and hesitant to it, where he does go through the portal and he sees it and realizes like this really is true, this is happening. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, from his perspective, it's also like, that's crazy. You don't know what else is going to happen.
Yeah.
You don't, like, think of, like, the butterfly effect. Like, what could possibly happen down the line if you do this? It won't necessarily be a good thing and stuff. But Al is unconvinced and is like, no, I truly feel that this will be beneficial.
And, like, this is why the portal has manifested.
Yes, and that's why it's here, and that's why it came to me, was so that I could go through and I could do this. And so, anyway, in the show, there's a fight that occurs between the two of them, like an argument that occurs. Jake leaves. Unfortunately, he comes back, I think, the next day, and Al has passed away.
Yeah.
And so he becomes determined. He's like, he feels horrible and a lot of like immense guilt about it. And he's like, no, I'm going to do this. Somehow I'm going to figure out how to do this. And so he does decide to, cross over into 1960 and try to figure out, because Al had given him a ton of the research and information that he had done each time that he'd gone through to like try and do something, like to try and figure out, was it really Lee Harvey Oswald who did this? Were there multiple shooters? Was it this? Was it that? Like, all of the many conspiracies that have existed over time. He's got like a murder board in his place.
Right, yeah.
And stuff. Yeah, it's like a whole thing.
Well, he has to do a lot of research.
So much research.
Like, cause like, it's not just like, oh, like, let's say, everything else aside.
Yeah.
Yes, Lee Harvey Oswald did assassinate him. He's got to figure out everything about this guy,
Exactly. So, it does, like, that's it. The story does move forward with Jake going into 1960 and trying to, disguise himself, go get a job, go do these things. And he does, initially really try to look into the conspiracy aspect of it and figure out if there is especially a Russian angle from these things, like a conspiracy between the CIA ordering the hit along with like possibly Russian officials and stuff. There's like a whole thing, and he starts to look into it. However, at the end of, I think it's at the end of the first episodes, he finds that what he starts to realize is that he's not supposed to be there because he doesn't belong in this time period. And so the past is almost trying to like force him out. And so he has a lot of near accidents that occur when he's trying to like do the research and look into this, follow people, get an idea of stuff. He has a lot of near misses.
Sci-fi aspect of it, right? So that's what's good about this like show book, is that it's not just that there's this portal that's sci-fi.
No.
It's the fact that like the past or like the timeline is like personified.
Yes.
And it knows that he's there, and it's like, you should not be here, you know?
Yeah, that's essentially what it is.
And it kind of like leads up to this, like, I remember watching it and feeling like, oh God, like if this is how this is happening, even if he does get to the point where he's going to succeed at what he's trying to do, the timeline itself might not allow it, you know?
Exactly, yeah, that's it. So at the end of his first foray into this, basically, when he comes back to the apartment he's been staying at, it's on fire.
Yeah.
And almost all of Al's notes have burned, almost all of this stuff, and he's like, this isn't worth it. I don't think I'm going to be able to do this. So at first, he decides, I'm just going to drive back to Maine, and I'm going to go back through the portal, and I'm done with this. I'm not doing this. However, he remembers something that we're introduced to at the beginning, which is a story that he's told. So he's a high school English teacher, and he's also teaching night classes to adults for continuing education. One of his students, his name is Harry Dunning, and he's the janitor at the school, and he struggles with some learning disabilities. However, at the beginning of the series, he's presenting a story in class, and the story is not fictional, unfortunately. It's a real story how on Halloween night of 1960, his father killed his siblings and his mother and almost killed him. However, he managed to survive. And Jake and Harry have like a nice relationship between the two of them, and he really tries to help Harry, tries to help him get a promotion at school. Like, he writes him a letter of recommendation, but of course, again, due to like his learning issues and the public school system being what it is, and people stuck in the public school system being who they are, they're like the principal's like, it's like never gonna happen. Like, it's not gonna work. Like, he's not gonna be able to keep up with anything.
Yeah.
So instead of leaving there, this is like a side plot that happens where Jake does actually decide to go to Kentucky, which is where Harry's from, and prevent the murder of his family on Halloween night. So that's like a whole thing that happens. That's how we're introduced to multiple other characters.
And I guess it's his way of saying, like, you know,
I'm going to fix something.
I'm going to fix something.
At least in my life with people that I know, I can't fix this massive historical event, but maybe I can fix something. I can help someone, and he wants to help Harry. So he goes back to try to prevent the murder from happening. That's it, because Harry's father, Frank, was a piece of shit. That's it. So he does actually manage to do it. He does actually manage to stop it from happening. He kills Frank, Jake does, before that's it. He's able to murder the family because he has attacked them that night. And he also gets help from a young man who's bartender nearby named Bill Turcotte, who's not as much of a character in the novel as my understanding. He's an older guy in the novel who also says that's it. Frank Dunning, this Harry's father, killed my sister a number of years ago.
Oh, interesting.
And he believes that that's the case. And that's also the case in the show. They do that. However, Bill is a much younger character, and he becomes like a surrogate younger brother for Jake. And Jake does wind up revealing to him that he's from the future and takes him back to Dallas with him so that they can possibly work together as a pair to help prevent the assassination from occurring.
Yeah, there's like a lot of driving in this show.
There's so much. Yeah. Well, because if you think about it, he's driving between all these different states, right? So
which
it's
are
like
really far
Texas,
from each other.
Kentucky, Maine, like these are all in very different areas. So it's there's a lot of like travel, and it's very like Americana. Like it's got like a very Americana across America.
It is nice that way. Like they do a good job with that on the show.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, anyway, I can't get into like all the details of it because there's just like, it's quite overarching and there's so much to it that happens. I mean, Jake meets a young woman named Sadie, who's a divorcee who's moved to Dallas and is she's the new librarian at the school that he gets a job at because he's a teacher, so he just gets a job as a teacher. I love the lack of background checks in the 1960s.
Oh, it's great. You know, he just rocks in and he's like, I'm a teacher.
Yeah, and he chats with the principal, who's basically like, yeah, you seem smart. Do you want to would you want to teach Catcher in the Rye in your class, kind of thing? Because like, I don't think that's a great idea because of course it had forward-thinking ideas.
That's right.
God forbid we want that. And they have like a funny conversation about that. He helps the secretary out named Miss Mamie a good few times. She's a woman of color who's obviously discriminated against pretty heavily at different times. He's in the teacher's lounge when he first starts his job, and he offers her a cup of coffee and everyone stops talking.
Yeah, like it must be really difficult to try and like integrate into like a whole different time period, especially one that was so vastly different.
Yes.
You know, like, yeah, you're all speaking the same language. You can get away with like the clothes and stuff, you know, because it's not like it's not like we dress in tinfoil in the future. But like to even just have that type of interaction, it's like what just happened. And you can just imagine how many times he would have tripped up just like teaching a class to youngsters.
Yeah,
you know?
that's it.
He has no idea anything they're talking about. He can't resonate with them on any level. You know,
that's it. Yeah, it must be like a very uncanny valley, very weird situation to be in, I would think.
And then as an English teacher, you got to teach books that were like
published prior to these dates. Like, don't think about anything that came after, obviously, because they wouldn't exist.
And you can't have any like progressive
ideas within it.
Yeah.
Like other things that maybe in the past 40 some odd years, 50 years have been spoken about.
Yeah, because like at this point, like your version of analyzing anything.
Yeah.
would be very different, like even if you picked up something like, I don't know, 1984 at this point, because that would have been published by then. Like your interpretation of it would be completely different.
Yep, exactly. So he meets a woman named Sadie. He has to help her with her own stuff as well because she has an abusive ex-husband who refuses to finalize their divorce, and that's like a whole thing that happens. Also, Bill becomes very like weirdly uncomfortably close to Lee Harvey Oswald's wife because they're living in the same complex, right? So that he can like get intel on him and stuff, but he becomes too close to her, too close to Oswald, who also gets suspicious. You know, and then that's it. Basically, before the end, Jake decides he's like, I need to just kill Oswald and just be done with it, kind of thing, so that this doesn't happen. But before he can, he's attacked and winds up in like a coma and then has some memory loss for a period of time.
Oswald,
Jake does.
Jake,
And then Sadie has to help him kind of like remember what needs to happen. And so he is able to, we finally get, that's it, of course, the last episode is set on November 22nd of 1963. The two of them, he and Jake and Sadie, I should say, head off into Dallas, and they manage to find Oswald prior to the shooting, and there's a whole fight and a scuffle that ensues between the two of them. But unfortunately, during that fight, Sadie is killed. She's shot and killed, and Jake is miserable, obviously, because they were together. It had been like a number of years at that point. So Jake also, but this also means the assassination is stopped, right? However, keep in mind when Jake had originally started going through, and he's in Lisbon, but of course in 1960, when he originally goes through the portal, there's a man who seems like a really kind of a crazy homeless man who's outside the diner. They just call him the yellow card man. He's got like a yellow card in his hat, and he just seems like a weird person. But of course, he's like your harbinger character because he keeps saying to him, he's like, you shouldn't be here. You're not, hey, I have to talk to you. You're not supposed to be here. And Jake tells him to like fuck off at some point while he's still like coming to terms with the idea that time travel exists. Whoa. And so, but that character doesn't really come back until later when he does, like, I know in the novel, I think he plays a bigger part because he explains more of like, you are not supposed to be here. You're changing the course of things. That is not supposed to happen. So when Jake goes back through the portal into 2016, he essentially finds that it's like a wasteland, and he speaks to Harry Dunning, who, is that the guy whose father he stopped from murdering him and his family in 1960. He learned basically, so JFK served 2 terms in the end because he was not assassinated. And then after that, the Alabama governor and segregationist named George Wallace was elected president after that. War broke out, and even though Kennedy attempted to fund a series of refugee camps, there's a lot of just like bad shit that happened everywhere, and things went south completely quickly, and there was nothing that anybody could do to prevent it at that point. So Jake realizes how much what he's done has impacted things, unfortunately, not the way that Al wanted them to be impacted. And so unfortunately he travels back to October of 1960 and resets the timeline because it resets every time you go back. And he meets Sadie again, but he doesn't pursue their relationship because he doesn't want her to die. And then in the present, he basically resets everything, comes back through, and then he travels to the town that Sadie was living, like she had moved to essentially, and he finds her there. She's in her 80s and she's receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award for her service to the community. And he goes to see her and asks her for a dance, and they have dance, and it's really sweet. And stuff. And that I know that a lot of that is how the novel ends as well. However, I believe that there is some like I said, like Bill's character is very different in the novel and doesn't play as much of a role. There are like several other, I think, instances as well of things that are like, okay, like yes, like there's like a lot of it is the same, but a lot of it isn't. And I know that there's more back and forth that happens, is my understanding. So the differences in the book, the big thing that's different in the book is the whole thing with Harry and his like storyline. In the series, they had it just so that Harry was from Kentucky. In the novel, Harry's from Derry, Maine. Oh, okay. Which is where this took place, and that's your it connection that comes through. So Jake, that's it. He tracks Frank Dunning. He saves all of the
except I think one kid in the book, I think, is still like killed or attacked or whatever. But he does save them. However, and then he returns back into the present day to be like, okay, great, at least I fixed that, at least I reset that. But unfortunately, then he learns that because of his actions, Harry would then go on to die in Vietnam.
Oh, because he got drafted.
Yeah. And it was and because he wasn't assaulted and then could not possibly perform in the military.
Yeah.
So he was drafted, and then, that's it. And then soon after this, in the novel as well, that's it. Al hasn't died in the interim. Al dies by suicide after this point.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah, it's pretty dark. It's very, very dark. And so that's it. Jake, kind of that point in the book, becomes resigned to his fate. So he returns, and then tries to like fix other things. He does still kill Frank Dunning. He doesn't I think originally when he does it, he just stops him. He doesn't kill him. But so I think, and then when he goes back the second time, he's like, fuck it. So he kills him. Yeah, that's it. Anyway, so there's just there are like some bigger differences that way that kind of make a big difference. And like I said, Bill's character is very different in the show as well. He plays like a much larger part in this because he's also like a young kid, very naive, but also very interested in like helping to do this. And of course the idea of time travel is fascinating. So that becomes...
it would for anyone.
It would be. I mean, God, that would be crazy.
We say we don't like sci-fi. If somebody rocked up and was like, hey, you want to try out my time travel portal? I'd be like, fucking A, let's go.
I think that's the thing, right? And I think that's why I like this novel so interesting as well, because this, for me, this is the kind of science fiction that I find fascinating, is the idea of something like changing history or being able to go back to like witness or be part of like some sort of like historical event that takes place. Like, I'm not much of a space person, I think is what it is.
Like,
I'm really,
I like sci-fi in
on the ground, on the earth, on the planet that I live on currently.
Yeah, I struggle to like wrap my head around like other planets.
Agreed.
Or like space travel, time travel, like all that. I'm just like, ugh.
I like the time travel aspect, but here, I guess, I've always just been kind of fine with that. Anyway, it's really interesting. I wonder some people who maybe had like read the book prior to the series coming out, like how you felt about it, because there were obviously a decent number of changes that were made. I'd be really curious to see, like what people's opinions are of that. And if you haven't like revisited the series in a while, or if you've never watched it, it's actually like a really interesting one. So that's kind of a cool thing to check out. But anyway,
I definitely have to rewatch it.
For sure. But anyway, let us know how you feel about all of that over on Instagram, TikTok, or Threads at FullyBookedCA. And you can also head over to the website, check out everything we've got going on over there, and sign up for the newsletter at fullybooked.ca/newsletter. But until next week, guys, keep on reading.
Thanks, everyone.